Hello, Launch family. Welcome back to Dare to Launch. My name is Chris. As always, I'm joined by my co-host, Mr. Jeff Walker.
Hey, everybody.
And we're also joined by a very special guest today, Mr. Dan Walker. Welcome back to the show.
Happy to be here.
Yeah. Very excited to have us on and excited to be kicking off this year with both of you. Well, Jeff, how's it been going? What's been up in 2025 for you so far?
I just scrambled back here to the headquarters to start recording because I was just at my first ski lesson of the year. So pretty stoked about that. Had a great day in the mountain.
You still take lessons, actually? Because how long have you skied? First off, well, let's start with that. Every day I've been at your cons, you always talk about skiing. So it's been a while, right?
It's been at least 40 years that I've been skiing.
So is this like an advanced lesson? Like, what are you doing with lessons of skiing?
I've been doing this every year for about probably 6 or 7 years. It was interrupted with COVID, but I think maybe 6, 7, maybe even 8 years. At the local mountain, they have this thing they call the adult clinic. And it's basically every Wednesday for 8 weeks in a row. It's January and February, once a week. And you're with the same instructor and the same group of guys. And I say guys because they split it men and women. So there's actually a lot more women doing it than men, but it's really cool because your instructor gets to know you over time and you get to have a progression of skills that you work on and you get to, you meet a few other dudes and that you might end up skiing with. It's been absolutely phenomenal. I think let's just say I spent 35 years learning bad habits because I never had lessons. I was completely self-taught. So I got really good at a whole bunch of bad habits and I've been deprogramming them ever since. And yeah, I do. I'm a pretty good skier. I live in a mountain town and I always hesitate to say I'm an expert because there are so many amazing skiers here. But I think I can ski the entire mountain. And I don't know, Dan, can I call myself an expert skier even?
I would think so. I mean, it's one of those funny things, because as you start to get into, I think it's true of everything. As you start to get up to the higher levels of anything, then you realize just how many more levels there are. So, I mean, if you look at the trail maps, a double black run is considered an expert run. And so you're more than confident on double black terrain and terrain that exceeds double black terrain even. So I think you could definitely call yourself an expert. But, maybe once you get up to the grades of black belt, like I know in at least like Taekwondo and I think karate, like, it's not just black belt, there's black belt and then there's black belt like degree 2, degree 3 up to like degree 9. And so, but you're still a black belt.
Yeah. I guess I'm okay with other people calling me an expert. I just have a hard time saying it about myself.
Yeah, totally. I mean, right. Because you never know who you're talking to,
And the reason, Chris, I asked Dan is because Dan is truly a badass skier. I mean, like he is something else.
But still, I don't know. Among a lot of the folks I would ski with, I might be a mid-level skier, so it's all relative.
Definitely be an expert next to me. I used to do the Bunny Hills. We had a place in London, Ontario called Bowler Mountain, and I put quotes around it because it's nowhere close to what you guys live next to in terms of mountains. But what I'm hearing you guys talk about, what you're talking about, Jeff, is like when you've been skiing for 40 years. At this point, you're still trying to master certain elements of it, or maybe you mentioned unlearn certain bad habits and now get different habits that I guess will help you grow in that way. Like are there specific things that when you go to this lesson, you want to get out of it, or are you looking for the coach or the teacher to really identify those things? That's
an interesting question, Chris, because the first chairlift up with the instructor, he's like, okay, let's talk about goals. Like what? And he wanted to go through there's 4 of us in the class. So he wanted to go through each of us and what are our goals? And I'm like, thankfully he asked me last. So I got to listen to everyone else's answer because my answer was like, I said, first of all, is any feedback you have for me, anything you see that I'm doing that you think I could be doing differently or better that I can work on, I want to know. So I just wanted to put that right out there that I didn't want him feeling trepidatious about, saying, boy, you're really screwing this up or whatever. I'm just like full honesty, just anything you see, because I have the things I think I'm doing wrong or I need to work on. So I said, first of all, that. And then, every year I go back and take these eight lessons, these 8 weeks of lessons, and over the summer and the fall, you forget what it is to do a really nice turn, have a great turn shape, to really be on your edges, to be, pressed, to be over your skis, as opposed to sitting back on your skis and, in an aggressive stance. So those basics. And then I said, and, over these last, 7 years or so of lessons, I feel like I've gotten so much better, progressed in such a huge way. And like on an intermediate run, I've got these beautiful turns and I'm on my edges and I'm on my skis. I'm over my skis as opposed to being leaned back. But, when the terrain gets steep and moguls and powder and it gets really challenging, then it can all break down. When the technique gets put under pressure, then I don't always have that grace and I'm always not on my edges. So I'm like, yeah, that's what I want.
There's so many things you're talking about here. I want to bring into business because I'm hearing you talk about this and I'm like, oh my gosh, it sounds to me like the mindset of going into this as no ego, right? Like you didn't have any ego about, I want some sort of, I know if I got some things to work on. I don't care about the ego side of it. I don't care that I've been doing this for 40 years. If you see something where I can do better, I want to hear it. And how often we hope for people who come into our coaching programs to have that mentality sometimes, or we talked about that on a previous episode, like when they come to advanced campaign design about, okay, there's going to be some things we're going to challenge you on probably that you might think, but actually it's important to change. And the second thing was the fundamentals, right? Like just the basics of it. Now, I don't ski, so I don't know, but keeping over your skis sounds like a starter lesson, right? Like it sounds like something I'd learn on day one. But to be reminded of that over and over and over again, even 40 years in, to know there are basics and fundamentals that just are foundational and to never give up. That, like, can you talk about the mastery of something in that capacity, maybe in relating it to business? Because I think that's kind of an interesting analogy.
Mastery is one of my favorite words because I think, Dan said it earlier. It's like the more when you start to really become advanced at anything, I think it's at the point where you start to understand that you don't know anything whatsoever, that you're come back to being a beginner. And we saw this, like you mentioned, advanced campaign design, and we've got the launch intensive coming up. And we had someone come to advanced campaign design. His name's James Klobasa. And James came in 2010. He came to a very expensive workshop that I ran, teaching people how to run launches. And that was in 2010. And since 2010, he's made his living running launches for other people, very successfully. He's made a very good living running other people's launches. And yet when we did our advanced campaign design workshop, he paid full ticket after 14 years of being in the business of helping other people with their launches, very successfully doing it. And he came and he walked into that room, which is absolute humility. He just wanted to learn. I'm here to learn. I've got all this work I've done. I'm ready to launch. This is how I think it is, but I'm an open book, and I'm here to learn. And that was so impressive to me. The people who think they know everything, those are the people that are like slightly beyond beginner, I mean, you're a beginner, you're a complete neophyte, then you become a beginner, you get a few skills, and all of a sudden, the world's your oyster, you think you know everything. But the reality is there's always layers, there's always levels, and you can always get better. At least that's my belief.
And I think that's such an important attribute. Like, to me, I see the people who are the best in the world at, my opinion, literally everything, are people who have fallen in love with progression, and they've fallen in love with the process and the experience of just continually trying to beat their best and continually trying to grow and continually trying to learn more. I just think that attitude gets you so far. And conversely, you see people who have such trouble getting started sometimes on something new because they're they're nervous about going in and trying. They're nervous about exploring the area where they don't know what they're doing. Or they're worried about looking silly, or they're worried about doing something where they obviously are a little out of their element, or they're nervous about someone seeing them do something if they're not like quite doing it right. It's like the people who they're so willing to try something new. You give them an idea and they're not trying to prejudge it and say like, okay, yeah, that's going to be the new thing that I'm going to do forever. It's just like, okay, cool. We're going to give it a try. We're going to try it out. We're going to test it out. We're going to see how it goes. We're going to see if it fits with what I know. So like Jeff, when your instructor's giving you feedback, like I would imagine that there might be times where he gives you feedback and it's like, okay, that's interesting. I'm going to try that. And you might try it and then see like, okay, that's not a perfect fit for me, but it's something that I can still use. It's something I can still, know that that's an option.
Was there a time when you learned that mindset? It feels like something maybe you would have learned at a certain point of like, I have to let go of ego and not just hold on to what I know all the time. And is there a time where you maybe learned that lesson, or you figured out that that's how you have to approach these things?
I mean, to me personally, it was honestly skiing was a really, really big foundational thing for this for me personally. And it was skiing. It was learning how to ski in a terrain park. So how to do tricks and how to slide rails and go off jumps, and not just going off jumps or sliding a rail, but doing tricks like trying to slide a rail and do a spin off the end of it, or try to do a trick in the air off a jump or something like that.
Doing the hard stuff.
Well, the funny thing is it's not even doing the hard stuff, it's doing the awkward, embarrassing things.
Oh yeah, if you don't land it, everyone's going to be like, oh wow, he really messed up.
It's not if you don't land it, it's that you are not going to land it. Especially like when you're first trying to slide a rail, like grind a rail. So, it's like a metal, like a handrail. This is something that came from skateboarding, went to snowboarding, as ski. It's fundamentally a very slippery thing that you have to balance on while you're moving. And the reality is that the first time you try to slide a rail, or actually first try to slide a box, which is a gentler version where it's made out of plastic and it's wider, what happens to every single person I've ever seen is that they immediately slide out and land on their side and just kind of slide to the end of it. It doesn't really like hurt that much. Like it's a little bit of like a, oh, but it doesn't really hurt that much, but it is awkward. It is embarrassing. It is funny looking.
I feel like I've seen YouTube videos of that.
Oh yeah. But here's the funny thing is you go to the terrain park, and right when you get to the park, there's like a little mound, there's a little hill that you ski down to get speed in order to jump onto the rails. And without fail, there's going to be like 24 people standing on it. And they're not going. They're not dropping in. They're not hitting the features. They're standing there. And mostly because you see them all kind of looking around like no one wants to be the person that's just going to go and just end up just totally eating it in front of all these people. So everyone's kind of standing there. So not only is it awkward, and let me tell you, when you have your feet shoot out from under you, it's going to be awkward. Not only is it awkward, not only is it going to make everybody laugh, but you have an audience. And you're going to fail probably like the first 100 times that you tried this. Like I remember going with my best friend, and we would just hit all the rails of the park, and we'd take off our skis and just walk back up. And we would just do that just over and over and over and over and over. And then eventually you don't crash. And then the next 10 times you do crash. And then eventually you get to the point where you're not crashing. But it really just makes you get over that thought. It makes you get over the thought like everyone else here is in the same boat, and they might laugh because it's funny looking, but they're also like, it's kind of a little bit of respect. Like, hey, that guy's going for it. He's trying it. And to me, it just brought such a mindset of like, your goal is just to get better. You're not going to be looking cool. You're not going to be nailing it right off the bat, but you're getting better. And what started happening is me and my one friend who I really got into this with is we got to this point where it was like every time we went skiing, we would walk back to the car at the end of the day, and I would be able to do something I was not able to do at the start of the day. Like I had landed some trick or gotten better at something, or there was some skill that I had learned that day that I just wasn't able to do before. And it was just the coolest thing. It was just the best feeling. And to do that for like a season, going up, 50, 60 plus days a year at the time. And every single day you're going back and you are notably better than you were. And to me, that just like flipped a bit of a switch in my brain where it was just like, yeah.
Well, it sounds a lot like certain parts of business too, right? I'm sure.
Absolutely.
It's firing off so many different thoughts for me, this discussion about growth, about getting better. When I first came into this world of like personal development, which I think is is certainly tangential to building a business. I don't know anyone who's really building a business and having a real success that has also not done some amount of personal growth work. And for me, I was sitting at home as stay-at-home dad late at night watching TV, taking care. I had 2 young children I'm taking care of, and my wife's supporting the family, and I'm sitting there night after night watching late night TV and seeing that Tony Robbins commercial. He had this. What do they call those things? Infomercials.
Infomercial,
And
yeah.
I probably watched it a dozen times before I finally picked up the phone and ordered it. And I paid the extra $30 to get it on CD instead of cassette. And when I got that CD set and I went through it religiously, and somewhere in there, I'll tell you what, Chris, even though I had nothing going on in my life except for, a great hadn't made any money in 6 years. I hadn't had a job in 6 years. But for some reason, I still thought I was like really smart. I thought I was smarter than everyone else. But then when I listened to those CDs and I realized how much expertise there was out there and how Tony Robbins was just conduit of all this amazing information out there, he was the person that was sort of bringing it to me. I was like, wow, there's a lot. That was my first exposure to this idea of mastery. I was a heck of a lot older than Dan when I learned that lesson. I was a heck of a lot older than you, Chris, when you learned that lesson. I could guess the time, when you learned it was in your early 20s. But yeah, that idea of that growth is possible, and you can keep on getting better and better and better. And Dan just said something that I think it probably went by pretty quick, but he said, once you have start to accomplish and you've gotten to a certain level of skill and you watch that beginner and the beginner falling over and over, he said, respect. And that's the thing, is like the people that have done the work and that have gotten a mastery or have approached mastery or become highly skilled, they always respect the beginners that are putting in the work. They always, they're not the ones laughing at the people falling on that rail. They're the ones that are respecting those people because they've put in the time. They know what it takes. They can see success before the person that's fallen on that rail. They don't see the success, but that expert who's seen them put in those reps and they're starting to see them do a few good things, they can see it. They can see it before the beginner can. And I feel like that's like our role in business for all 3 of us, really, right? Is a lot of times someone could be starting out and it just seems like a slog, and they don't feel like they're getting anywhere, but we can see their success before even they can. And I think that is a sacred part of this, of the work we do, the 3 of us do, and our whole team does, is holding that space for those people so they can fall and hit that rail over and over and over, but also so where we can start to see that their movement forward and the early steps of gaining skill and gaining expertise. That's our job.
Yeah, definitely the moments where you do actually get some level of progress, like a little bit. It's the comparison of yourself to who you were before and not to where someone else is today that I think helps people keep moving forward too, because Dan, you meant, well, at the end of the day, I was better at this one thing. I wasn't not falling. I wasn't, a master of it after one day, but there was a level of progress that what you focus on in those challenging early days as a beginner, it's super important to know where to focus your energy and put your attention in those moments in order to be able to keep going.
That's a really great point. And I think it's so massively important to pay attention to the progression and to realize that like getting the tiniest little bit better on any individual day is massive, because that's all you're ever going to do, really. You're never going to, in pretty much anything, I think, you're never really going to go have like some massive skill jump within a day, but you can have smaller jump. I see a lot of people get discouraged because they don't see the massive jump. They want to be able to roll up and hit the rail and pop off and have it look super smooth and super stylish and be 100% confident that they're not going to fall. And that's the goal. And so then if, maybe they're crashing 100% of the time, and then now they're crashing 80% of the time. Like, it could be so easy to approach that and say, well, what? I mean, I'm still crashing all the time. I'm not getting any better, except that now you're falling 20% less. And then if the next day you're falling 10% less, and then 10% less, and then, pretty soon after a week or two, you're at the point where, yeah, you're only crashing 20% of the time instead of 80 or 100% of the time. That's massive. But I do think that's a skill, to look for those small levels of progression and say, like, okay, well, how did I get better? And then how am I going to get better tomorrow? And just realizing that you're moving along the road to your eventual goal. But I mean, it sounds sort of cliche, right? To say like, oh, it's not going to happen overnight. But it's funny how many people I think really do sort of beat themselves up when something doesn't happen overnight.
You just mentioned the word discouragement. And I have a brief parable that I want to share about that word. Maybe you've heard it, maybe you haven't, but the devil was going out of business. And so he decided to have a garage sale. And the garage sale, he's selling all of these tools that he's been using to ply his trade. And the demons all show up to this garage sale, and they're like, oh, there's jealousy, and oh, there's avarice, and oh, there's hate over there. Oh, I made a good deal on that. But there's this one tool just tucked away in the back. It's got a bow on it. And they all like, well, what's that one? What's that one? It's not labeled. And the devil's like, well, I know. I don't know if I'm going to sell it. It's been really important for all the work that I've been doing. Well, what is it? They all chime in, wondering what it is. And he says, well, that's the tool of discouragement. And with that tool, I get all the other tools to work. And it's one of those words that I think when you hear it and you think about discouragement, if we allow that into our lives when we're pursuing something, how easy is it for all the other bad stuff to start happening in our lives?
We have one moment, Chris, where today, where we were on Dead Spike was the run, Dan. And you know what? They got a lot more snow up there than they reported. There was like 4 inches of fresh on Dead Spike. We're on Dead Spike, and it's a mogul run. So this is going to be like where our instructor he skis down for 100 yards, and he says, "You guys wait up here. I'm going to ski down so I can watch you ski down and really start to get to know what's going on." So there's me and the 3 other dudes in the class. And our instructor, Michael, he skis down, and a couple of the guys are like, "Oh, he makes it look so easy." It pisses me off when people say stuff like that, because it's like they diminish the amount of work this person has done. He's a freaking professional ski instructor. It's not an easy thing to get to like the level 3 ski instructor. It's really hard to do. And he spent his life, he's probably about early 40s, he spent his whole life getting there. And I mean, to like act as if like, I'm horrible because I can't do that, it diminishes the amount of work it torques me off. So the guy's like, "Oh man, he makes it look so easy." And I just turned to him and said, "That's because he's a professional."
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny, I remember I had a friend in college. His name was Nick Cahill, and he was one of those dudes who was a little bit older than everyone else. I think he may have taken a little bit of time off work, so he was like a little older than everyone else. But he was one of those guys that's just like it. He was good at most everything that he was doing, and he's one of those dudes who look at him as like, okay, he's like a little bit ahead of most of us. Really good professional photographer now. Built a race car in his parents' garage in high school because he was just like, this will be a fun thing to do. And he was a couple years older, so he had a little more disposable income and all things. And he'd be the dude who he came in and would throw big house parties and they bring people over and just sort of good vibes. But it was funny because he would post like on Facebook or whatever, he'd post like some of the different adventures that he was going on or some of the different things he'd be doing. And I just would remember, I don't know why this was such a memory for me, but as people would say stuff like that. Someone would say like, like, oh my gosh, that must be so cool. That must be so nice to be able to do that, or, oh man, like you're so lucky to be able to do that. And he would reply, and it was funny because I feel like most people couldn't pull off a response like this, but he could. And he would say like, take inspiration. Like, don't get discouraged, get inspired. Like some version of that, and I've always thought that since. Like, you can look at the guy who's skiing down the mogul run and he's so much better than you, and you could say like, oh man, he makes it so easy. Like, I suck at this. Or you could say like, whoa, look what's possible when you practice. Like, look what's possible when you work at it a little bit more. Like, there's the two sides of it. You can look at it and say, oh, I suck by comparison, or you can look at it and be like, look how good I could be.
I think that's one of the biggest predictors of future success. Do you look at people and feel jealousy for what they're accomplishing, or do you look at them and take inspiration? And I personally think that is one of the biggest predictors of future success.
Yeah. We would have sales competitions and we would do count ups in front of hundreds of people where there's way more people in the audience than there are on stage. And there would be two types of reactions to that. We would bring people to those conferences, and there would be people who go to it and then they just like, they think, quit, basically. Oh, I should quit because I'm not doing this at that level. And then there was always, every year, some person who's in the crowd and they look at it and they say, well, if they can do it, I can do it. And they just react totally different, took inspiration from it. And inevitably there were people like, I had this one guy, I can't remember his name now. I think it was Rob. It might've been Rob Sturtini. I don't know, but he was just too cool for school. If you've ever met one of those people who you've tried to train or work with and they just are too cool for school. And I had to like drag him like kicking and screaming to this conference basically. And he was too cool to like sell, too cool to go out and do these things, too cool. And then he went to this conference and saw all the success that was around him and that was literally at his doorstep. He had all the skills, he had all the opportunities, he had a great network of people. He really was talented, but he didn't have the mindset that it was worth putting in that effort to really go after it. And when he saw all these other people who in his mind weren't as cool as him, I think, doing well, it took that for him to go out and over the next 3 months, like actually work, actually go do it. And then he wound up being like my top rep that summer and like, number 4 in the country or something like that. But everything was there for him except that one thing, which was the inspiration instead of discouragement. And it made every difference in the world for him.
It's awesome that he did take the inspiration instead of just frustration and discouragement. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, even if you are in that mindset right now, like, cause there are people who probably listen to this and be like, oh, that's me. I've been that person before. And I think we can all step into it. But then the good news is you can switch that mindset. And when you hear the stories and the people that we interview or the, case studies or whatever it is, getting good stuff into your brain or being able to listen to something like this where you can be inspired rather than discouraged, that mindset can be cultivated and can serve you over the course of this 2025 year, all year. Yeah, that's I think what we're trying to do here with something like a podcast.
Chris, you remember for years back when we did our big live in-person events, when we did these big events before COVID, and we did this Launch Club Spokesperson of the Year, and you were around for at least some of those.
Oh yeah.
And I think we did it 4 times, and it was a big competition among all the people in our Launch Club program, and they could compete all year long to have the best launch and the most deserving launch, we called it. So it wasn't necessarily the biggest dollars, it was the most inspirational. Each year we would end up with 10 finalists, and the 10 finalists would present on stage, and then one person, the audience, would vote, our coaches would vote. It was a very elaborate process. And we picked the Launch Club Spokesperson of the Year. But just getting to that stage and being one of the finalists, one of the 10 finalists on that stage, was a huge accomplishment. And because then the next year they would get to come out and they would come to a mastermind right here at this table I'm at the secret headquarters. But a funny thing I've noticed is that Every single person that won that Launch Club Spokesperson of the Year, and in fact, pretty much everyone that made it to the final 10, they told me one version or another of the same story, which was, I sat in the audience and I've watched those 10 people on stage get to present. And I said, next year, I'm going to be one of those. Next year, I'm going to be on that stage. And so if you think about that, that was almost a prerequisite, is that people looked at that stage and took it as inspiration and said, I'm going to be there. And then the next year they were there. Now, can I say that everyone in the audience that said they're going to be on stage made it? I don't know. Probably not. There's probably some that said they would make it, but didn't. But I will tell you that everyone that made it to the stage the year before it said, I'm going to be there. That inspires me. I'm going to be there. And if that kind of mindset can set you up to win at that level, then maybe for all our listeners, maybe I would suggest that that might be a good mindset for you to take on.
Especially leading into a brand new year, getting started, and where do you want to be in a year? Powerful question. Well, I think that's a great place to leave it for today. Thanks a lot for listening, Dare to Launch family, and we hope this conversation inspires you to dare to launch. Hey, Launch family, one more thing before you go. There's a few spots left in Jeff's Launch Intensive workshop. This is a live in-person training with Jeff, Dan, and Justin in the room. Only 40 people are going to be there. Small, intimate, and super, super powerful. If you'd like to check that out, all you have to do is go to getyouLaunched.com today. Thanks a lot for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode.